Green light flashed, and a steel sword suddenly thrust out, pointing at the middle-aged man's left shoulder. The sword-wielding boy didn't wait for the move to be used, and shook his wrist to tilt the sword, and the sword tip had already cut towards the man's right neck. The middle-aged man blocked with his sword, and there was a clang sound. The two swords collided, making a buzzing sound. Before the shock sound died down, the two swords flashed, and 3 moves were already broken. The middle-aged man's long sword suddenly struck down, directly chopping the boy's head. The boy dodged to the right, and with a sword gesture in his left hand, the steel sword stabbed the man's thigh. The two people's swordsmanship was swift, and they fought with all their strength. There were 2 people sitting in the east of the martial arts training hall. The one on the top was a middle-aged Taoist nun in her 40s, with a sullen face and tightly closed lips. The one on the bottom was an old man in his 50s, twisting his long beard with his right hand, looking very proud. The 2 seats were more than 10 feet apart, and behind them stood more than 20 male and female disciples. More than 10 guests sat on a row of chairs on the west side. The eyes of both the east and the west were focused on the fight between the 2 people in the arena. Seeing that the young man and the middle-aged man had exchanged more than 70 moves, the sword moves were getting closer and closer, and there was still no winner. Suddenly, the middle-aged man swung his sword with great force, and his body swayed slightly, as if he was about to fall. A young man in a green shirt among the guests on the west couldn't help but laugh. He immediately realized that he had lost his composure and quickly reached out to cover his mouth. Just then, the young man in the arena slapped out with his left hand and hit the man's back. The man took a step forward to avoid it, and the long sword in his hand suddenly circled and shouted, "Hit!" The young man's left leg had been stabbed by the sword. He staggered under his leg, and the long sword was propped up on the ground. He stood up straight and was about to fight again. The middle-aged man had already put the sword back into the sheath and smiled. "Brother Chu, thank you, thank you. Isn't it badly injured?" The young man was pale, biting his lip, and said, "Thank you, Brother Gong, for showing mercy." The old man with the long beard was full of. The old man with the long beard glared at her and said seriously, "Junior sister, why have you forgotten the rules of our sect?" The Taoist nun snorted and stopped talking. The old man's surname is So, and his name is Zinuap. He is the head of the East sect of Wulianjian. The Taoist nun's surname is Xian, and her Taoist name is Xuangqing. She is the head of the West sect of Wulianjian. Wulianjian was originally divided into 3 sects: East, North, and West. The North sect has been declining in recent decades, but the East and West sects are both full of talents. The Wuliang sword sect was founded in Wuliang Mountain, Nanzhao, during the later Tang dynasty of the 5 dynasties. The head of the sect lived in Jianhu Palace of Wuliang Mountain. After it was divided into 3 sects during the Rongguo period of the Song dynasty, every 5 years, the disciples of the 3 sects would compete in Jianhu Palace. The winning sect would live in Jianhu Palace for 5 years and compete again in the 6th year. The one who won 3 of the 5 sword fights would be the winner. During these 5 years, the loser would study hard in order to wash away the shame in the next sword meeting, and the winner would not dare to relax at all. The northern sect won 40 years ago and moved into Jianhu Palace. 5 years later, it was defeated and left the palace. The head of the sect was furious and led his disciples to move to Shangzi. Since then, he no longer participated in sword fights and had no contact with the Eastern and Western sects. In the past 35 years, the Eastern and Western sects have won and lost against each other. The Eastern sect won 4 times, and the Western sect won twice. The middle-aged man surnamed Gong and the young man surnamed Chu fought in the 4th match of the sword duel. Since the man surnamed Gong won, the East sect won 3 out of 4 matches, so there was no need to fight in the 5th match. The people sitting on the brocade stool on the west side were from other sects. Some of them were notaries invited by the leaders of the East and West sects, and the rest were guests who came to watch the ceremony. These people were all well-known people in the Yunnan martial arts world. Only the young man in blue sitting at the bottom was an unknown person, but he laughed when the man surnamed Gong made a mistake. This young man came with the old martial arts master Ma Weiwei from Puer in southern Yunnan. Ma Weiwei was a big tea merchant, rich and hospitable, and had the style of Meng Cheng. When the martial arts masters in the rivers and lakes came to him, he would treat them wholeheartedly, so he had a good relationship with people, but his martial arts were mediocre. When Zhezong heard Ma Weiwei introduce him, he said that the young man's surname was Duan, which was the national surname of Dali. There were thousands of people with the surname Duan in Dali. Zhezong didn't take it seriously at the time, thinking that most of them were Ma Weiwei's disciples. The old man Ma's own kung fu was ordinary, and the disciples he trained were not that good. Therefore, he didn't even bother to say I have long admired him. He just bowed and entered the guest sieve. Unexpectedly, this young man didn't know his own limitations. When Zhezong's favorite disciple pretended to make a false move to lure the enemy, he laughed and ridiculed. Zhezong said with a smile, "The 4 disciples sent by junior sister Xixia this year have considerable attainments in swordsmanship, and we were especially lucky to win the 4th match. Junior brother Chu is so young, but he has actually reached this level. His future is truly limitless. 5 years later, I'm afraid our East and West sects will have to switch positions. Ha ha, ha ha." He laughed loudly, and suddenly turned his eyes to look at the young man surnamed Duan, and said, "My inferior disciple just won with the fake move falling step, and this brother Duan doesn't seem to think so. Yes. How about asking brother Duan Shi to teach me a thing or two? Brother Ma Wu is a great leader in southern Yunnan. A strong general has no weak soldiers under him. Brother Duan Shi must be very skilled." Ma Weiwei blushed slightly and said hurriedly, "This brother Duan is not my disciple. How can your brother be someone's master with these few tricks? Brother Zhou, please don't make fun of me in person. This brother Duan came to Puer's house and heard that I was going to Wuliang Mountain, so he followed me and said that Wuliang Mountain is a quiet place and he wanted to enjoy the scenery." Zhezong thought to himself, "If he is your disciple and it hurts your face, I can't do too much. Since he is an ordinary guest, I can't be polite. Someone dares to ridicule the infinite sword in Jianhu Palace. If Dongzong's martial arts doesn't teach him a disgraced person, how can he lose his face?" He then sneered and said, "Please tell me how to call brother Duan. Who is his disciple?" The young man surnamed Duan smiled and said, "I am a single name, and I have never learned any martial arts. When I see other people wrestling, whether they are really wrestling or pretending, I can't help but laugh." Zhezong, hearing the lack of respect in his words, he couldn't help feeling angry and asked, "What's so funny about that Duan?" You waved the folding fan in his hand and said lightly, "There's nothing funny about standing and sitting alone. Lying on the bed, it's not funny. If he's lying on the ground, haha, it would be ridiculous. Unless he is a 3-year-old baby, that's not the case." Zhezong couldn't help but feel angry as he listened to his words becoming more and more arrogant. Said, "Brother Ma Wu, is this brother Duan your good friend?" Ma Weiwei and Duan Yu were friends for the first time, and they didn't know each other's details at all. He was easygoing by nature, and Duan Yu wanted to come to Wuliang Mountain with him. He couldn't refuse, so he brought him with him. Hearing Zhou Mu's tone, he was very annoyed. The attack is bound to be very powerful. Why should such a good young man suffer a big loss, he said. Although Brother Duan and I have no close friendship, we always come together. I see that Brother Duan is so polite, and he may not know any martial arts. The smile just now must have been unintentional. Come on, brother is also hungry. Brother Zocian, hurry up and prepare the banquet. Let's congratulate you on this great day. Why should Brother Zocian care about this young man? Zozimu said, since Brother Duan is not a good friend of Brother Mawu, then if he offends me, it will not be considered as a loss of Brother Mawu's reputation. Guangzhe, you were laughed at just now. Please ask me for advice. The middle-aged man Gong Guangzhe was eager for his master to say this. He immediately drew out his long sword, stood in the middle of the field, turned the hilt upside down, cupped his hands and said to Duan Yu, Friend Duan, please. Duan Yu said, Very good. You practice, come on. I'll watch. Still sitting in the chair, he didn't get up. Gong Guangzhe's face suddenly turned purple and he said angrily, What did you say? Duan Yu said, You are holding a sword in your hand and wandering around like this. You think you want to practice swordsmanship, so just do it. I never like to watch people use swords, but if you come here, you can't watch them. Gong Guangzhe shouted, My master told you to come down and let's make some gestures. Duan Yu lightly waved his folding fan, shook his head and said, Your master is your master. Your master is not my master. Your master can't touch you, but your master can't touch me. Your master asked you to compete with others' sword. You have already competed with others. Your master asked me to compete with you. Firstly, I don't know how to compete with you. Secondly, I am afraid of losing. Thirdly, I am afraid of pain. Fourthly, I am afraid of death. Therefore, I said I won't compete. No comparison. What he said about your master and my master was as if he was struggling to speak. Many people in the martial arts training hall couldn't help laughing when they listened. Infinite Sword Zhezong Xuanking's sect had half men, and several female disciples giggled. The solemn atmosphere in the martial arts training hall was swept away in an instant. Gong Guangzhe strode over, pointed his sword at Duan Yu's chest, and shouted, Are you really not good at it? Or are you just pretending to be stupid? Duan Yu saw that the tip of the sword was only a few inches away from his chest, so he only had to send it lightly to pierce his heart. But there was no trace of panic on his face, and he said, Of course I really don't know how to do it. What's the point of pretending to be stupid? Gong Guangzhe said, You come to Wuliang Mountain Sword Lake Palace to act wild. You must not survive. I'm sorry? Who is your disciple? If you don't tell me directly, don't blame me for being ruthless. Duan Yu said, Why is this uncle of yours so cruel and domineering? I hate watching people fight the most in my life. Your sect is called Wuliang Jian, and they live in Wuliang Mountain. There is a saying in the Buddhist scriptures, there are 4 Wuliangs, 1 kind, 2 compassion, the 3 joys, and the 4 equanimities. Of course you all understand. The heart to enjoy happiness is compassion. The heart to avoid suffering is compassion. The heart to welcome all living beings to be free from suffering is called joy. And the heart to give up resentment to all living beings is called joy. The thought of intimacy and equality is the same as the Buddha of infinite life. Amitabha Buddha, Amitabha Buddha. As he was talking about Buddhism and chanting sutras, Gong Guangzhe retracted his sword, suddenly swung out his left hand, and slapped him firmly across the face. Duan Yu tilted his head slightly, trying to dodge, but the opponent's palm had already been slapped and retracted. His handsome white cheek suddenly became swollen, and the 5 fingerprints were very clear. Everyone was shocked when they saw Duan carelessly teasing the other party with nonsense. They expected that he must be a skilled person, but they didn't know that he couldn't avoid Gong Guangzhe's casual palm. It seemed that he really didn't know any martial arts. It is common for martial arts masters to deliberately pretend to be stupid and play tricks on their opponents, but there is no such thing as someone who is not good at martial arts. Gong Guangzhe couldn't help but froze when he succeeded. Then he grabbed Duan Yu's chest, lifted him up, and shouted, "I thought he was some kind of great person, but I didn't know he was a pustule," and threw him heavily to the ground. Duan Yu was about to get out when his breast bag hit the table leg with a bang. Ma Wu couldn't bear it, so he grabbed it and stretched out his hand to help him up, saying, "It turns out that I really don't know martial arts, so why bother hanging out here?" Duan Yu touched his forehead and said, "I came here to enjoy the mountains and rivers, but who knew they were going to fight with swords? What's the point of watching people play monkey tricks like this? It's much more fun to watch people playing monkey tricks. Goodbye, Ma Wei. I'm leaving now." A young disciple next to Zhezong jumped out, stopped in front of Duan Yu, and said, "Since you don't know martial arts, you just walked away with your tail between your legs. So that's it? Why did you say you want to watch us compete with each other? Why don't you watch a monkey show? This is too deceptive. I'll give you two ways to go. Either I'll show you a swordsmanship that's worse than a monkey show, or you can kowtow to my master 8 times. Say fart to yourself 3 times. Duan Yu said with a smile, "You fart." The man was furious and stretched out his fist to strike Duan Yu in the face. The force of the punch was strong and it was about to hit him black and blue. Unexpectedly, in the middle of the punch, something flew down from midair and entangled him. That young man's wrist. This thing was cold and slippery, and as soon as it was wrapped around my wrist, it squirmed. The young man was startled, and when he hurriedly withdrew his hand, he saw that what was wrapped around his wrist was a red snake about a foot long, green and red. Very scary. He exclaimed loudly and waved his arms vigorously, but the snake was tightly wrapped around his wrist and could not be shaken off. Suddenly Gong Guangzhe shouted, "Snake! Snake!" His face changed drastically. He put his hand into his collar and felt around his vest, but he couldn't find anything. He jumped around in a hurry and hurriedly undressed. These two changes were extremely weird. While everyone was surprised, they suddenly heard someone above them laughing. Everyone looked up and saw a girl sitting on the beam, holding snakes in her hands. The girl was about 16 or 17 years old, wearing a green shirt, with a smile as bright as a flower, and holding a dozen small snakes about a foot long in her hands. These small snakes are either green or flowery and have triangular heads. They are all poisonous snakes. But the girl held it in her hand as if it were a plaything without fear. Everyone looked up at her, but only glanced at her. When they heard the loud exclamations of Gong Guangzhe and his junior brother, they all turned to look at those two people. Duan Yu still raised his head and looked at her, and saw that the girl's feet were swinging, as if it was fun to sit on the beam like this. So he asked, "Girl, were you the one who saved me?" The girl said, "Then the evil man beat you. Why didn't you fight back?" Duan Yu shook his head and said, "I won't fight back." Suddenly he heard a sound of and everyone shouted in unison. Duan Yu lowered his head and saw Zhezong holding a long sword with a slight blood stain on the blade. A red snake was broken into 2 parts and fell to the ground, showing a sharp look. He was killed by his sword. Gong Guangzhe had already taken off his upper body clothes and was jumping around with his arms bare. A small green snake was swimming on his back. He tried to catch it with his backhand, but failed to catch it several times. Zhezong shouted, "Guangzhe, stand still." Gong Guangzhou was stunned. His sword flashed white, and the green snake was broken into two pieces. Zhou Zimu's sword was like the wind, and everyone didn't see clearly how he struck. The green snake had been cut off, but Gong Guangzhou's back was not damaged at all. Everyone cheered loudly. The girl on the beam shouted, "Hey, hey, bearded old man, what did you do to kill two of my snakes? I'm going to be rude to you." Zhou Zimu said angrily, "Whose girl are you and what are you doing here?" He was secretly puzzled. He didn't know when the girl climbed up the beam without anyone noticing. Although everyone was concentrating on watching the sword fight between the East and West sects, they couldn't be unaware that there was a person lying on their heads. If this matter got out, the people of Willian's sword would be embarrassed. But seeing the girl's feet swinging, she was wearing a pair of green shoes embroidered with a few small yellow flowers, which was purely a little girl's dress. Zhou Zimu said again, "Jump down quickly." Duan Yu suddenly said, "It's so high, won't you get hurt if you jump down? Hurry up and ask someone to get a ladder." As soon as this was said, someone else couldn't help laughing. Several female disciples of the Western sect thought, "This person looks good, but he is actually a fool. Since this girl can climb up the beam without being noticed, her Qinggong must be good. Why does she need a ladder to climb down?" The girl said, "First compensate me for my snake, then I will come down to talk to you." Zhou Zimu said, "Two small snakes. What's the big deal? You can catch two anywhere." He saw that the girl played with poisonous things as if nothing had happened. She was young and not to be feared, but the teacher, father, and brother behind her were probably very important, so he was actually tolerant of her in his words. The girl smiled and said, "That's easy for you to say. Go catch two and show me." Zhou Zimu said, "Jump down quickly." The girl said, "I won't." Zhou Zimu said, "If you don't come down, I'll come up and pull you down." The girl giggled and said, "Try it. If you can pull me down, it's your skill." Zhou Zimu, as a master of a sect, couldn't play with a little girl in front of many martial arts masters and disciples, so he said to Shuang Qing, "Junior sister Xian, please send a female disciple to catch her down." Shuang Qing said, "No one in the Western sect has such good Qinggong." Zhou Zimu's face sank. Just as he was about to speak, the girl suddenly said, "If you don't compensate me for the snake, I'll show you how powerful I am." She took out a furry object from her left waist bag and threw it at Gong Guangzhou. Gong Guangzhou thought it was a strange hidden weapon, so he didn't dare to reach out to catch it, and hurriedly dodged to the side. Unexpectedly, the furry thing was alive. It twisted in the air and pounced on Gong Guangzhou's back. Everyone could see clearly that it was a gray-white little mink. The mink was extremely agile, running around on Gong Guangzhou's back, chest, face, and neck at an extremely fast speed. Gong Guangzhou grabbed it with both hands, but although he was fast, the mink was 10 times faster than him, and every time he grabbed and pounced, he missed. Others saw him waving his hands quickly, scratching and hitting his back, chest, face, and neck, but the mink still kept moving. Duan Yu laughed. "Wonderful, wonderful. This mink is very interesting." The little mink was less than a foot long, with red eyes and very sharp claws on its 4 legs. In a moment, Gong Guangzhou's naked upper body was covered with fine blood marks from the mink's claws. Suddenly, the girl blew a few times. A white shadow flashed, and the sable pounced on Gong Guangzhou's face, and its fluffy tail swept towards his eyes. Gong Guangzhou grabbed with both hands, but the sable had already run to the back of his neck, and Gong Guangzhou's finger almost pierced his eye. Zhou Zimu took 2 steps forward and thrust out his long sword. At this time, the sable had already run to Gong Guangzhe's face, and Zhezong thrust his sword at the sable. The sable twisted its body and had already run to the back of Gong Guangzhe's neck. The tip of Zhezong's sword stopped at his disciple's eyelid. Although the sword did not pierce the sable, the onlookers were all amazed. If the sword tip had been half an inch longer, Gong Guangzhe's eye would have been destroyed. Xuangqing thought, "Senior brother Zhou's swordsmanship is amazing. I can't even compare to him. How can I be so good at this move?" Golden Needle overcoming tribulation. Swish, 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 swish. Zhezong used 4 swords in a row. Although his swordsmanship was extremely fast, Liao was still 1 step faster. The girl shouted, "Old man with a long beard, you are very good at swordsmanship." She whistled twice, and Liao jumped down and suddenly disappeared. When Zhezong was stunned, he saw Gong Guangzhe scratching and groping his thighs with both hands. It turned out that Liao had slipped into his pants from the trouser legs. Duan Yu laughed and clapped his hands, saying, "Today is really an eye-opener and amazing." Gong Guangzhe hurriedly took off his trousers, revealing 2 thighs covered with black hair. The girl shouted, "You evil man loves to bully others. I told you to take off all your clothes. See if you are ashamed." She screamed twice, and the Liao was really obedient. She climbed up Gong Guangzhe's left leg and immediately got into his underpants. There were many girls in the martial arts hall. Gong Guangzhe refused to take off his underpants no matter what. He jumped around, slapped his lower abdomen and buttocks with his hands, screamed, and stumbled out. Just as he ran to the hall door, a man suddenly rushed in from outside the door. With a bang, the 2 of them bumped into each other. The momentum of this out and in was extremely fast. Gong Guangzhe staggered back, but the man who came in from outside the door fell to the ground with his head tilted up. Zhezong screamed, "Junior brother wrong." Gong Guangzhe didn't care that the Liao in his pants was still crawling from his left leg to his right leg, and then from his right leg to his buttocks. He rushed to help the man up. The Liao suddenly crawled to the vital part of his front genitals. He screamed "Ah!" and hurriedly tried to grab Liao with both hands, and the man fell down again. The girl on the beam giggled and said, "I've done enough to you." With a long hiss, Liao got out of Gong Guangzhe's pants, ran up the wall, ran to the beam, and returned to the girl's arms in a flash of white. The girl praised, "Good Liao." She grabbed the tail of a small snake with 2 fingers of her right hand, lifted it upside down, and shook it in front of Liao. Liao grabbed it with her front feet and ate it. It turned out that the many small snakes in the girl's hand were food for Liao. Duan Yu had never seen it before, and he watched with relish. He saw Liao eat a small snake and get into the leather bag around the girl's waist. Gong Guangzhe helped the man up again and screamed, "Uncle Wrong, what's wrong with you?" Zhou rushed forward and saw his junior brother Rongzich's eyes wide open, his face full of resentment, but there was no breath in his mouth and nose. Zhou was shocked and tried to massage him, but he couldn't save him. Zhou knew that although Rongzich's martial arts skills were inferior to his own, they were much better than Gong Guangzhe's. He couldn't avoid the collision and died instantly. He must have been seriously injured before he came in. He unbuttoned his shirt to check his injuries. After unbuttoning his shirt, he saw 8 black words written on his chest. "Shenem Gang killed Wu Yang's sword." Everyone shouted loudly at the same time. These 8 black words were deeply rooted in the skin. They were not written with ink or carved with sharp objects. They were written with highly toxic drugs, which corroded and sank deep into the skin. Zhou stared at it for a moment and could not help but get furious. He raised the long sword in his hand, making a buzzing sound, and shouted, "Let's see whether it is the Shenem gang that kills the Wuliang sword, or the Wuliang sword that kills the Shenem gang. If we don't take revenge, how can we be human beings?" He looked at Rongzich's body again and found no other injuries. He shouted, "Guang Hao, Guangzhe, go outside and take a look." Gan Guanghao and Gan Guangzhe, two senior disciples, each drew their long swords and came out in response. This caused chaos in the hall. Everyone no longer cared about Duan Yu and the girl on the beam, and surrounded Rongzich's body and talked about it. Ma Weiwei pondered and said, "The Shenem gang is getting more and more outrageous. Brother Zhou, I wonder how they have become enemies with your section." Zhou Zima was heartbroken by the tragic death of his junior brother, and choked up and said, "It was to collect herbs. Last autumn, 4 incense masters from the Shenem gang came to Jianhu Palace to ask for an audience, and wanted to go to our back mountain to collect some herbs. Collecting herbs is not a big deal. The Shenem gang originally made a living by collecting and selling herbs. Although they have no friendship with us Wuliang Jian, they have no grudges. But Brother Ma Wu must know that our back mountain cannot be easily allowed to outsiders. Not to mention that the Shenem gang is just a casual acquaintance with us. Even good friends have never been to the back mountain to play. This is just a rule passed down by the ancestors, and we, as juniors, dare not violate it. It's just a violation. It's nothing serious." The girl on the beam put the 10 snakes in her hand into a small bamboo basket on her waist, took out a handful of melon seeds from her bosom and ate them, her 2 feet still swinging, suddenly threw a melon seed at Duan Yu's head, hitting him on the forehead, and said with a smile, "Hey, do you want to eat melon? Come up." Duan Yu said, "There is no ladder. I can't get up." The girl said, "This is easy." She untied a green silk ribbon from her waist and hung it down, saying, "You hold the ribbon, I will pull you up." Duan Yu said, "I am heavy, you can't pull me up." The girl smiled and said, "Try it, you won't die if I fall." Duan Yu saw the belt hanging in front of him, stretched out his hand and grabbed it. The girl said, "Hold on tight." Duan Yu's body was off the ground with a slight lift. The girl pulled his hands together and pulled him up to the beam in a few strokes. Duan Yu said, "Your little mink is really fun, so obedient." The girl took the mink out of the leather bag and held it in her hands. Duan Yu saw that the mink's fur was smooth and its red eyes were shining as it looked at him. It was very cute, so he asked, "Is it okay for me to touch it?" The girl said, "You can touch it." Duan Yu reached out and gently stroked the mink's back, only to feel his hands soft and warm. Suddenly, the mink made a hissing sound and got into the leather bag around the girl's waist. Duan Yu was not prepared and shrank back. He didn't sit firmly and almost fell down. The girl grabbed his collar and pulled him close to her, laughing, "It's strange that you don't know martial arts at all." Duan Yu said, "What's strange?" The girl said, "You don't know martial arts, but you come here alone. You will definitely be bullied by these evil people. What are you doing here?" Duan Yu was about to tell her when he heard footsteps and Gan Guanghao and Gan Guangzhe ran into the hall. At this time, Gan Guangzhe had put on his trousers again, but his upper body was still bare-chested. The 2 men looked quite panicked and walked up to Zhou Zimua. Gan Guanghao said, "Master, the Shenem gang gathered on the opposite mountain and guarded the mountain road, saying that no one was allowed to go down the mountain. We saw that the enemy had many people, and we didn't dare to act rashly without the master's order." Zhou Zimu said, "Well, how many people came?" Gan Guanghao said, "About 70 or 80 people." Zhou Zimu sneered and said, 70 or 80 people want to destroy Wu Yang's sword. I'm afraid it won't be that easy. Gong Guang just said. They shot an envelope with an arrow, and the writing on the cover was very rude. Then he presented the letter. Zozimu saw the 5 big characters Ziu Zozimu written on the envelope, so he didn't take the letter and said, "Open it and take a look." Gong Guang just said, "Yes." He opened the envelope and took out the letter. The girl whispered in Duan Yu's ear, "The evil man who hit you will die." Duan Yu asked, "Why?" The girl whispered, "The envelope and the letter are all poisoned." Duan Yu said, "How can it be so powerful?" Gong Guangzhi read Shenem Gang's letter to Zhou. Listeners, he didn't dare to call his master's name directly, and when he read the word Zhou, he skipped the 2 words Zimu below. You have 1 day to cut off your right hand, break your weapon, and withdraw from Wuliang Mountain Jianhu Palace. Otherwise Wuliang's sword will kill everyone. Shuang Qing, the head of Wuliang Sword West sect, sneered. What kind of person is Shenem Gang they boasted so much? Suddenly, with a bang, Gong Guangzhi fell backwards. Gan Guanghao, who was standing beside him, hurriedly called, "Junior brother," and stretched out his hand to help him. Zozimu rushed forward 2 steps, turned his palm and pressed on his chest, and lightly exerted force, knocking him back 3 steps, and shouted, "I'm afraid it's poisonous. Don't touch his body." Gong Guangzhi's facial muscles kept twitching, and the palm of his hand holding the letter turned dark black in an instant. His feet stood up a few times and he was dead. It took only 1 meal, and 2 good fighters of the Wulian sword Dongzone died in a row. Everyone was shocked. Duan Yu whispered, "Are you also from the Shenem Gang?" The girl said angrily. "Bah! I'm not. What nonsense are you talking about?" Duan Yu said. "Then how do you know that the letter is poisoned?" The girl laughed and said, "The skill of poisoning is very superficial, and it can be seen at a glance. These stupid methods can only harm ignorant people." Everyone in the hall heard her words, and raised their heads together, only to see that she was still biting melon seeds, and her feet in flowery shoes kept swinging back and forth. Zozimu looked at the letter in Gong Guangzhi's hand, but didn't see anything unusual. He turned his head to look again, and saw a faint phosphorescence flashing on the envelope and the letter paper. He was startled and looked up at the girl and said, "What's your name?" "Young lady," the girl said, "I can't tell you my name. It's called a secret that can't be leaked." At this moment, Zozimu heard 2 more words, and he was furious. He forced himself to hold back and said, "Then who is your father? Who is your teacher?" The girl laughed and said, "Haha, I won't fall for your trick. If I tell you who my father is, you will know my name. Since you know my name, you can find out my name. My teacher is my mother. I can't tell you my mother's name." Zozimu heard her voice was both tender and soft, and she was a native of Yunnan. Undoubtedly, she thought, in the Yunnan martial arts world, which couple is good at Qinggong and could be her parents? The girl had never fought before, so she couldn't guess from her martial arts skills, so she said, "Miss, please come down and discuss countermeasures together. Shenem Gang said that no one is allowed to go down the mountain, and even you will be killed." The girl smiled and said, "They won't kill me. Shenem Gang only kills people from Wuliang Sword. I heard the news on the road, so I came to see the excitement of killing. Bearded old man, you are good at swordsmanship, but you can't use poison, so you can't beat Shenem Gang." These few words hit the weakness of Wuliang Sword. If they fight with real Kung Fu, Wuliang Sword East and West sects, plus the 8 masters from various sects hired to notarize, will not be defeated by Shenem Gang in any case. But when it comes to using poison, everyone knows nothing. Zhou Mu heard that her tone was full of gloating, as if the more people of William's sword died, the happier she was. He snorted coldly and asked, "Miss, what news did you hear on the road?" He was used to being bossy, and any random word seemed to require a proper answer. The girl suddenly asked, "Do you want to eat melon seeds?" Zozimu's face turned slightly purple. If it weren't for the powerful enemy outside, he would have exploded long ago. He suppressed his anger and said, "No." Duan Yu interrupted. "What kind of melon seeds are these? Osman, thus rose or pine nut flavor?" The girl said, "Oh. Are there many special requirements for melon seeds? I don't know. My mother fried these melon seeds with snake gall. Eating them often can brighten your eyes. You can try it." She grabbed the handful and stuffed it into Duan Yu's hand, and said, "People who are not used to it may find it a bit bitter, but it's actually delicious." Duan Yu couldn't refuse her, so he took a melon seed and put it in his mouth. It tasted astringent, but after a little taste, it tasted like a sweet fruit, and his tongue was full of saliva. He ate it one by one. He put the shells of the eaten melon seeds on the beam one by one, but the girl was unscrupulous and spit them out. The melon seed shells flew over the heads of the people, and many people frowned and avoided them. Zozimu asked again, "Miss, what news did you hear on the road? If you can tell me, I will be grateful." In order to get the news, he had to be very polite. The girl said, "I heard the Shin'en gang talking about the infinite jade wall." "What is that?" Zozima was stunned and said, "Infinite jade wall? Is there any precious jade or precious wall in Wuliang Mountain? I haven't heard of it." "Sister Shuangqing, have you heard anyone talk about it before?" Shuangqing answered. The girl rushed to say, "Of course he hasn't heard of it. You two don't have to act together. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it." "Humph. Is it rare?" Zozimo looked embarrassed and said, I remember. What the Shin'en gang said was probably the mirror stone beside the White Dragon Peak of Wuliang Mountain. This stone is as smooth as a mirror and can reflect hair. Some people say it is a piece of beautiful jade, but in fact, it's just a white and shiny stone." The girl said, "Wouldn't it be better if you told me earlier? How did you become enemies with the Shin'en gang? Why did they want to kill you?" Wuliang Jian, without a single person left. Zozimu saw that he had become the host, and if he wanted the girl to reveal any information, he had to tell her first. The situation was urgent, and in front of so many foreign guests, he couldn't capture the girl and torture her, so he said, "Miss, please come down and I will tell you in detail." The girl swung her feet and said, "There's no need to tell you in detail. Anyway, your words are both true and false, and I only believe 30% or 40% of them. Just tell me something casually." Zozimu raised his eyebrows and showed anger on his face, but then he restrained himself and said, "Last year, the Shin'en gang wanted to collect herbs in our back mountain, but I didn't agree. So they came to steal them. My junior brother Rongziju and several disciples saw them and blamed them. They said, 'This is not the Golden Palace or the Imperial Garden. Why can't outsiders come?' Did you, Wuliang sword? By Wuliang Mountain, the two sides had a verbal conflict and started fighting. Junior brother Rong showed no mercy and killed them both. That's how the feud was formed. Later, on the bank of the Lankang River, the two sides fought again and owed a few lives." The girl said, "Oh, that's it? What herbs did they want to collect?" Zozimu said, "I'm not sure about that." The girl said proudly, "I don't think you know. You've told me about the enmity, so I'll tell you two things. That day I caught snakes in the mountains and gave them to my lightning Marden to eat." Duan Yu said, "Your Marden is called the lightning Marden?" The girl said, "Yes, when it runs. Isn't it as fast as lightning?" Duan Yu praised. "That's right, the lightning Marden. What a good name. Zozima glared at him, blaming him for interrupting, but the girl was talking about the key point, and if he scolded Duan Yu, he was afraid that she would get angry and refuse to say anything, so he just frowned and kept silent. The girl said to Duan Yu, "The lightning marten loves to eat poisonous snakes and nothing else. I raised it since it was a child, and it's 4 years old this year. It only listens to me, not even to its parents. It scares people when I tell it to, and bites people when I tell it to. This marten is really well behaved." As she spoke, she reached her left hand into the leather bag and stroked the marten. Duan Yu said, "Mr. Zhou has been waiting anxiously. Just tell him." The girl smiled and said to Zozimua, "I was looking for snakes in the bushes at that time, and heard a few people coming. One of them said, 'If we don't kill Wuliang Jian and occupy his Wuliang Mountain and Jianhut Palace, everyone in our Shenem gang will be killed.' I heard that killing him would be fun, so I squatted and said nothing. I heard them continue to talk, saying that they were following the order of Lingju Palace on Biamiao Peak to occupy Jianhut Palace in order to find out the truth about the Willian Jade Wall." When she said this, Zozimu and Chuangqing looked at each other. The girl asked, "What is the Lingju Palace on Biamiao Peak? Why does the Shenem gang have to obey its orders?" Zozimu said, "This is the first time I've heard of the Lingju Palace on Biamiao Peak from a girl. I didn't know that the Shenem gang was following someone else's orders to make things difficult for us. Thinking that the Shenem gang must follow orders, the Biamiao Peak must be extremely powerful. There are thousands of mountains and peaks in the south of Yunling, but I have never heard of a Biamiao Peak." I became more worried and frowned. The girl ate 2 melon seeds and said, "At that time, I heard another person say, since the Tongtiang grass in Wuliang Mountain may be able to cure the root of the gang leader's illness, all brothers must go and get the Tongtiang grass even if they are cut by thousands of swords." The first person sighed and said, "No one can cure the life and death talisman on my body except the old lady of Tianshan Mountain. Although the Tongtiang grass has magical properties, it can only slightly alleviate the pain of being unable to live or die when the life and death talisman takes effect." As they talked, they walked away. "Have I made it clear enough?" Zozimu did not answer, but lowered his head in thought. Shuangqing said, "Brother Zhou, the Tongtiang grass is not a great thing. The leader of Shenem gang, Sekong Xian, wants to use this grass to treat diseases and relieve pain. Just give him some, isn't it?" Zozimu said angrily. "What's the big deal about giving him some Tongtiang grass?" But they are determined to occupy the Jianhut Palace of Wuliang Mountain. "Didn't you hear?" Shuangqing snorted and said nothing more. The girl stretched out her left arm and pierced Duan Yu's armpit, saying, "Go down." She jumped off the beam. Duan Yu screamed and his body was already in the air. The girl landed gently, her left arm still holding his right arm, and said, "Let's go outside and see what the Shenem gang is like." Zozimu stepped forward and said, "Wait a minute, I have a few more questions." The girl said that old man Sekong Xian was hit by a life and death talisman, and when it attacks, he can neither live nor die. "What is that? Who is Tianshan Tongdalao?" The girl said, "First, I don't know the 2 things you asked. Second, you asked me so ruthlessly. Even if I knew, I would never tell you." At this moment, the Willian sword was with the enemy pressing in. Zozimu really didn't want to make another enemy, but he heard that the girl's words contained a lot of important concerns, which were related to the future survival and honor of Wulian Jian, so he had to ask for details. He immediately flashed and blocked the girl and Duan Yu, saying, "Miss, the evildoers of Shenem gang are outside. If you go out rashly, if something goes wrong, I, Wuliang Jian, will feel sorry." The girl smiled and said, I am not your guest. Besides, you don't know my name. If I am killed by Shannon Gang, my father and mother will never blame you for not protecting me well. Then she took Duan Yu's arm and walked out. Zozima moved his left arm slightly, drew his long sword from his waist, and said, Miss, please stay. The girl said, Are you going to fight? Zozima said, I just want you to say what you just said more carefully and clearly. The girl shook her head and said, If I don't say it, you will kill me. Zozima said, Then I have no choice. The long sword was across his chest, blocking the way. The girl said to Duan Yu, This old man with a long beard wants to kill me. What do you say? Duan Yu shook the folding fan in his hand and said, Whatever the girl says, we will do. The girl said, What if he kills me with a sword? What should I do? Duan Yu said, We share happiness and difficulties, eat melon seeds together, and fight swords together. The girl said, These few words are very good. You are a very friendly person. It's worth our acquaintance. Let's go. She stepped out of the door, ignoring the long sword in Zozimu's hand. Zozimu shook his long sword and pointed it at the girl's left shoulder. He didn't mean to hurt anyone, but he didn't want her to leave the martial arts hall. The girl slapped the leather bag on her waist and made two hissing sounds. Suddenly, a white shadow flashed and a lightning Marden suddenly jumped out and pounced on Zozimu's right arm. Zozimu hurriedly reached out to grab it, but the lightning Marden was really as fast as lightning. With a click, it had already bitten his right wrist and then drilled into the girl's leather bag on her waist. Zozimu screamed and his long sword fell to the ground. In an instant, he felt his right wrist numb and shouted, Poison! Poison! You ghost Marden are poisonous. As he said that, he grabbed his right wrist with his hand, fearing that the poison would go up. The disciples of Wu Yang's sword sect rushed forward. 3 of them went to help the master, and the rest held their long swords, surrounding the girl and Duan Yu, shouting, Quick! Bring the antidote, or I'll stab the little girl to death. The girl smiled and said, I don't have the antidote. You just need to pick some tongtian grass and boil a bowl of it. Give it to him and he'll be fine. But he can't move within 3 hours, otherwise the poison will enter his heart, and that would be terrible. Why are you all stopping me? Do you want this Marden to take a bite? As she spoke, she took out the lightning Marden from her leather bag, held it in her right hand, and walked out with Duan Yu on her left arm. The disciples saw their master in such a sorry state that they knew that they could not avoid the little Marden's lightning fast bite with their own skills, so they could only watch the 2 of them walk out of the martial arts training hall. The guests who came to Jianhu Palace were shocked to see the lightning Marden's extraordinary speed. No one dared to step out. The girl and Duan Yu walked out of the gate side by side. Some of the Wuliang Jian disciples were in the martial arts training hall, while others were guarding outside to prevent the Shenem gang from attacking. The 2 of them left Jianhu Palace and did not meet anyone. The girl whispered, The lightning Marden has eaten thousands of poisonous snakes in its life, and its teeth are very poisonous. When the old man with the long beard was bitten by it, he should have cut off his right arm immediately. If he had delayed for a few more hours, he would not have lived to the 8th day. Duan Yu said, You said that we only need to pick some tongtian grass, boil a big bowl of it, and drink it to detoxify. The girl laughed and said, I lied to them. Otherwise, how could they let us out? Duan Yu was surprised and said, Wait a moment, I'll go in and talk to him. The girl grabbed him and said angrily, You fool, you said that. Are we still alive? Although my Diaour is powerful, how can I resist them if they rush at me? You said that we eat melon seeds together and face swords together. I can't abandon you and run away by myself. Duan Yu scratched his head and said, "Then you should give him some antidote." The girl said, "Alas, you are so fussy. You are still so kind when people hit you." Duan Yu touched his cheek and said, "He hit me once, and it doesn't hurt anymore. Why do you still remember it, alas? It's a pity that the person who hit me died." Mencius said, "Compassion is the beginning of benevolence. Buddhism says, saving a life is better than building a 7-pole pagoda. Although Mr. Zozimu is fierce, he is polite to you. He has such a long beard, but he calls himself I to you, a little girl." The girl smiled and said, "I was on the beam at that time, and he was naturally I in the underground. You just said nice things to help him and asked me to give him the antidote. But I really don't have it. Only my father has the antidote. Besides, they, Wu Yangjian, will be killed by Shannon Gang in a blink of an eye. If I go to ask my father for the antidote, Zozimu's head will not be on his neck, and there will be a lot of blood on his body. Poisonous or not, I'm afraid it doesn't matter much, right?" Duan Yu shook his head and had to stop talking about the antidote. Seeing the moon rising, shining on her rosy white face, making her look even more beautiful, he said, "You can't tell that old man with the long beard your full name, but can you tell me?" The young man smiled and said, "What full name? My last name is Zhezong, and my father and mother call me Linger. I have a full name, but no full name, only a nickname. Let's go sit on the hillside over there, and you tell me, what are you doing in Wuliang Mountain?" The two walked side by side to the hillside in the northwest corner. Duan Yu walked away while saying, "I ran away from home and wandered around. When I arrived in Puer, I had no money. I heard that Ma Wiwa was very hospitable, so I went to his house for a free meal. He was going to Wuliang Mountain. I had heard that Wuliang Mountain had beautiful scenery, so I followed him to enjoy the scenery." Zhongling nodded and asked, "Why did you run away from home?" Duan Yu said, "Daddy wanted to teach me martial arts, but I refused. He pressed me too hard, so I had to run away." Zhongling opened her big round eyes and looked him up and down. She was very curious and asked, "Why don't you want to learn martial arts? Are you afraid of hard work?" Duan Yu said, "I'm not afraid of hard work. I just couldn't figure it out after thinking about it, and I didn't listen to Daddy. Daddy got angry, and he and Mom started arguing again." Zhongling smiled and said, "Your mom always protects you and quarrels with your dad, right?" Duan Yu said, "Yes." Zhongling sighed and said, "My mom is the same." He looked into the distance in the west, lost in thought for a while, and asked again, "What can't you figure out?" Duan Yu said, "I have been Buddhist since I was a child. Dad hired a teacher to teach me the 4 books and 5 classics, poems, and songs, and invited a monk to teach me Buddhist scriptures. For more than 10 years, I have learned the Confucian benevolence and the Buddhist abstinence from killing and anger, and compassion. Suddenly, Dad taught me to practice martial arts and learn how to beat and kill people. Naturally, I felt that it was wrong. Dad argued with me for 3 days in a row, and I was still unconvinced. He recited many sentences in the Buddhist scriptures incorrectly and interpreted them incorrectly." Zhongling said, "So your father was furious and beat you up, right?" Duan Yu shook his head and said, "My father didn't beat me up. He stretched out his hand and pressed 2 acupuncture points on me. In an instant, I felt like there were 10 million ants biting my body, and there were also many mosquitoes sucking blood at the same time. Daddy said, 'Does this feel good? I am your father, and I will naturally release the acupuncture points for you later. But if you meet an enemy, you will neither die nor live.' Why don't you try to commit suicide after I pressed the acupuncture points? I couldn't even lift a finger, and there was no way I could commit suicide. Besides, I was alive and well, so why would I commit suicide later? My mother quarreled with my father, and my father released my acupuncture points. The next day I sneaked away. Zhongling listened blankly, and suddenly said loudly, "So your father can press acupuncture points, and he is the best in the world, right? Is it strange that you can't move and feel numb and itchy when I poke you with my finger somewhere on your body?" Duan Yu said. "Yes. What's so strange about that?" Zhongling's face was full of surprise, and she said, "What's so strange about that? You actually said it's strange in the martial arts world. If someone can learn a few appointment pressing skills from your father, he would be willing to count out 10,000 times and beg for 10 or 20 years. But you just don't want to learn. It's really strange." Duan Yu said, "I don't think this appointment pressing skill is anything great." Zhongling sighed and said, "You must not say this, let alone let others know." Duan Yu asked curiously, "Why?" Zhongling said, "Since you don't know martial arts, you don't know many bad things in the martial arts world. Your Duan family's appointment pressing skill is unparalleled in the world, called Yu Yang Finger. When martial artists hear the 3 words Yu Yang Finger, they are really salivating and envious and can't sleep for 10 days and 10 nights. If someone knew your father knew the skill, someone might kidnap you and ask your father to exchange the acupuncture secrets of the 1 finger of sun. What should we do then?" Duan Yu scratched his head and said, "Is there such a thing? If my father gets angry, he will have a good fight with that person." Zhongling said, "Yes, others would not dare to fight with your Duan family, but for the secret of the 1 finger of sun, that's unacceptable. Besides, if you fall into the hands of others, things will be very difficult to deal with. So, don't tell others that your last name is Duan in the future." Duan Yu said, "There are tens of thousands of people with the last name Duan in Dali, but not all of them know the acupuncture method." "I'm not Duan. What do you call me?" Zhong smiled and said, "Then you can take my last name for now." Duan Yu smiled and said, "That's good. Then you have to call me Big Brother." "How old are you?" Zhongling said. 16. "How about you?" Duan Yu said. "I am 3 years older than you." Zhongling picked up a blade of grass and tore it off piece by piece. Suddenly, she shook her head and said, "I always find it hard to believe that you don't want to learn the Yang Finger. You are lying to me, aren't you?" Duan Yu laughed and said, "You are so good at using the Yang Finger. Can you really make a living? I think your lightning Marden is much more powerful, but it can kill people in 1 bite, and I don't like it." Zhongling sighed, "If the lightning Marden can't kill people in 1 bite, what's the use of it?" Duan Yu said, "You are a little girl. Why do you think about these fighting and killing things?" Zhongling said, "Do you really not know, or are you pretending?" Duan Yu asked curiously. What? Zhongling pointed to the east and said, "Look." Duan Yu looked in the direction of her finger, and saw a wisp of green smoke rising from the eastern hillside, a total of more than 10 wisps, and he didn't know what it meant. Zhongling said, "You don't want to kill people or fight, but if others want to kill you or beat you, you can't just stick your neck out for them to kill you, right? These green smokes are the Shin'em gang cooking poison, which will be used against the Wuliang sword later. I just hope we can sneak out quietly and not get implicated." Duan Yu shook his folding fan, disapprovingly, and said, "This kind of murder and fighting in the martial arts world is getting more and more outrageous. Someone from the Wuliang sword killed someone from the Shin'em gang, and now Rongziju was harmed by the Shin'em gang, and they also spared Gong Guangzhe. It's a tit for tat, and it's enough. Even if there is still something unfair, You should declare it to the government and ask the parents to make a fair judgment. How can you kill and burn people at will? Is there no law in our Dali kingdom? Zhongling made 3 tisk, tisk sounds, and said with contempt, "You sound like a royal relative or a government official. We ordinary people won't bother with you." She looked up at the sky, pointed to the southwest corner, and whispered, "When the dark clouds cover the moon, we will sneak out from here. The people from Shinem Gang may not see us." Duan Yu said, "No. I want to see their leader and tell him not to kill people like this." Zhongling showed pity in her eyes and said, "Brother Duan, you are too ignorant. The Shinem Gang is insidious and cruel, and good at using poison. You saw with your own eyes how they killed 2 people just now. Let's not make trouble. Let's go quickly." Duan Yu said, "No, I have to take care of this matter. If you are afraid, wait for me here." He stood up and walked east. Zhongling waited for him to go several feet away, then suddenly leaped up to chase him, stretched out her right hand, and grabbed his shoulder. Duan Yu heard footsteps behind him, and when he turned around, his right shoulder had been grabbed. Zhongling hooked her foot, and Duan Yu could not stand up, and fell forward. His nose hit the rock, and blood immediately flowed out of his nose. He got up angrily and said angrily, "Why did you play such a prank? It hurts me so much when you fell." Zhongling said, "I want to test you again to see if you are pretending or you really don't know martial arts. I'm doing this for your own good." Duan Yu said angrily, "What's good?" He stretched out his hand and wiped his nose, only to see that his hand was full of blood, and the blood flowed down, staining his chest with a pool of blood. His injury was not serious, but seeing so much blood flowing, he couldn't help but scream, "Ouch! Ouch!" Zhongling was a little worried, and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood for him. Duan Yu was angry and pushed her away, saying, "You don't need to please me. I won't pay attention to you." He didn't know martial arts, so he didn't know where to hit her. He pushed her away casually, with his palm facing her chest. Without thinking, Zhongling naturally hooked his wrist with her backhand, and pushed him away. Duan Yu immediately fell out, and with a bang, his back head hit the stone and he fainted. Zhongling saw him lying motionless on the ground and shouted, "Get up quickly, I have something to tell you." Seeing that he didn't move at all, she panicked. When she leaned over to look, she saw that his eyes were raised and his breath was weak. He had fainted. She quickly stretched out her hand to pinch his philtrum and rubbed his chest hard. After a long time, Duan Yu woke up slowly. He felt that the place where his back was leaning against was very soft. He smelled a faint fragrance in his nose. He slowly opened his eyes and saw Zhongling sighing and saying, "Fortunately, you are not dead." Duan Yu saw that his body was leaning against her arms, and the back of his head was resting on her waist. He couldn't help but feel a wave of pain in the back of his head. He couldn't help but scream, "Ouch!" Zhongling was startled and said, "What's wrong?" Duan Yu said, It hurts a lot." Zhongling said, "You are not dead. Why are you screaming?" Duan Yu said, "If I were dead, would I still scream?" Zhongling chuckled and lifted his head. He saw that there was a big blood tumor on the back of his head, as big as an egg. Although there was no bleeding, it must be very painful. She said angrily, "Who told you to be frivolous and vulgar? If it was someone else, I would kill him on the spot. I told you to fall down like this, but you are so stupid. You got it for free?" Duan Yu sat up and said in surprise, Am I frivolous and vulgar? How could this happen? It's such a huge injustice." Zhongling seemed to understand the relationship between men and women, and after hearing what he said, Her face turned slightly red, and she said, I won't tell you anymore. It's your own fault. Who told you to push me here? Here. Duan Yu realized it immediately and felt embarrassed. He wanted to say something to explain, but he felt it was inconvenient to say it, so he just said, I really didn't mean it. Then he stood up. Zhongling also stood up and said, if you didn't mean it, I'll forgive you. Finally you woke up. You made me so anxious. Duan Yu said, just now in Jianhu Palace, if you hadn't helped me, I would have received 2 more slaps. Now you threw me down twice, and we are all in trouble. In short, it is my fate and I can't escape this disaster. Zhongling said, are you angry with me when you say that? Duan Yu said, do you want me to happily say, Miss, you hit me well. That's wonderful. After you hit me, do you want me to thank you more? Zhongling held his hand and said apologetically, from now on, I will never hit you again. Don't be angry this time. Duan Yu said, unless you hit me hard twice in return. Zhongling was reluctant, but when she saw him turning around angrily and about to leave, she raised her head and said, okay, I'll let you hit me back twice. But don't hit me too hard. Duan Yu said, if you don't hit me hard, what kind of revenge is that I must hit you hard? If you don't let me hit you, then forget it. Zhongling sighed, closed her eyes, and whispered, okay. After you hit me back, don't be angry anymore. After a while, she felt Duan Yu's hand hitting her. She opened her eyes and saw him looking at her with a smile. Zhongling asked curiously, why don't you hit me again? Duan Yu stretched out his right little finger and flicked her cheeks lightly. He smiled and said, it's just 2 heavy hits. Does it hurt a lot? Zhongling was overjoyed and smiled. I knew you were a good person. Duan Yu saw her standing in front of him, only a few feet away. Her breath was like orchid. The more he looked at her, the more beautiful she became. He was reluctant to leave, and after a long time, he said, okay, my great revenge has been avenged. I'm going to find that Xixia gang leader. Zhongling said anxiously, fool, you can't go. You don't understand anything about the martial arts world. If you violate other people's taboos, I can't save you. Duan Yu shook his head and smiled. Don't worry about me. I will be back soon. You wait for me here. Then he strode towards the place where the green smoke rose. Zhongling shouted to stop him, but Duan Yu just didn't listen. Zhongling was stunned for a while, and said, okay, you said that we can eat melon seeds together and fight with swords together. He chased after him and walked side by side with him, and stopped persuading him. Less than a cup of tea later, 2 men in yellow came up to him. The older one on the left shouted, who are you? What are you doing here? Duan Yu saw that both of them had medicine bags on their shoulders and held a short knife with a very wide blade. So he said, I am Duan Yu. I want to see your leader Xixia for something. The old man asked, what is it? Duan Yu said, I will tell you after I see your leader. The old man asked, what sect do you belong to? How do you address me, master? Duan Yu said, I don't have any sect. My master's surname is Men, his given name is Shancheng Xiaxian, and his courtesy name is Gyro. My master specializes in the study of Yili, and has a deep understanding of the study of hexagrams and the theory of the meaning of words. The master he was talking about was the master who taught him to read scriptures and write essays. But the old man heard about Yili and Zhuogua and Xixia and thought they were 2 special martial arts. Seeing Duan Yu waving his folding fan, he seemed to be a man with unique skills and kept it hidden. He did not dare to neglect him. Although he could not remember the person called Men Shuzheng in the martial arts world, Since the other party said he had deep attainments, he thought it was not necessarily nonsense. So he said, "In this case, please wait a moment. Young hero Duan, I will report it." Zhongling saw him hurried away and turned around a hillside, and asked, "You lied to him about easy and difficult things. What kind of skills are those? If Xixia tests you later, I'm afraid it will be difficult to get away with it." Duan Yu said, "I am very familiar with Zhou Yi. If Xixia tests me, it may not be difficult to stump me." Zhongling was stunned and didn't know what to say. The old man came back with a sullen face and said, "What are you talking about? The leader wants you to go." From his appearance, it is obvious that he has been reprimanded by Xixia. Duan Yu nodded and followed him with Zhongling. The three of them turned around a mountain in a moment and saw more than 20 people sitting in a pile of rocks. Duan Yu approached and saw a thin old man sitting on a high rock in the crowd. He was taller than others, with a goatee under his chin and a very arrogant look. He guessed that it was the leader of Shenem gang, Xixia, so he bowed and said, "Please come in, Xixia leader. I am Duan Yu." Xixia nodded, but did not stand up. He asked, "What are you doing here?" Duan Yu said, "I heard that your gang has a feud with Wuliang's sword. I just saw 2 people die tragically in Wuliang's sword. I feel very sorry and came to persuade them. You should know that enemies should be resolved rather than created, not to mention that violent fighting and killing are against the law of the country. If the government knew about it, it would be very inconvenient. Please stop before it is too late, Xixia gang leader, and return quickly, and do not seek revenge on Wuliang's sword anymore." Xixia listened to him coldly, and remained silent after he finished speaking, just squinting his eyes and not making any comments. Duan Yu said again, "This is good advice from me. I hope you will think twice." Xixia still looked at him curiously, and suddenly laughed at the sky, saying, "Who are you, kid? And why do you come to entertain me? Who asked you to come?" Duan Yu said, "Did anyone teach me to come? I came to tell you myself." Xixia snorted and said, "I have been walking in the world for 40 years, and I have never seen such a bold and reckless boy like you. Ah Shen, take down these 2 boys and girls." A big man next to him responded and reached out to grab Duan Yu's right arm. Zhongling shouted, "Wait a minute. Xixia gang leader, this Mr. Duan is trying to persuade us. If you don't agree, that's fine. Why bother being violent?" He turned to Duan Yu and said, "Brother Duan, Shenem gang won't listen to you. We don't need to mind their business. Let's go." That Ah Sheng stretched out his big hand, had already put Duan Yu's hands behind his back, held them tightly and looked at Xixia, waiting for his instructions. Xixia said coldly, "Shenem gang hates others to meddle in other people's business. 2 little kids are talking nonsense to me. There must be something else behind their interest. Ahong, tie up this little girl too." Another big man replied, "Yes," and reached out to grab Zhongling. Zhongling swayed and took 3 steps back, saying, "Master Xixia, I'm not afraid of you. It's just that my parents don't allow me to cause trouble outside. Tell this guy to release Brother Duan, and don't force me to take action, which would be very inconvenient." Xixia laughed and said, "The little girl is bragging. Ahong, why don't you do it?" Ahong replied, "Yes." He stretched out his hand to grab Zhongling's arm. Zhongling retracted his right arm, and his left palm came out suddenly. The edge of his palm was like a knife, and it had already cut into Ahong's neck. Ahong lowered his head to avoid it. Zhongling's right fist hit the ground, and with a bang, it hit Ahong's chin, knocking him out. Xixia said lightly, This little girl is really good, but she is not good enough to come to Shenem Gang to make trouble. He winked at a tall old man beside him and waved his right hand. The old man immediately stood up and took 2 steps closer. He was almost 2 feet taller than Zhongling. He looked down from above and stretched out his hands. His 10 fingers were like bird claws, grabbing Zhongling's shoulders. Zhongling saw the fierce attack and was eager to dodge. The 5 fingers of the old man's left hand passed 5 inches in front of her face. Zhongling only felt the sharp wind and was afraid. She shouted, "Master Xixia, tell him to stop. Otherwise, I will be rude. You will be in trouble if my father scolds me in the future." While she was talking, the old man had attacked 3 times in a row, and Zhongling dodged each time. Xixia shouted, "Catch her." The old man's left hand led diagonally, and his right hand drew a small circle. Suddenly, his 5 fingers turned over and grabbed Zhongling's right arm. Zhongling screamed "Ah!" Her face turned pale with pain, her left hand trembled, and she hissed twice. Suddenly, a white light flashed. An old man Gao groaned, letting go of her arm and sitting on the ground. The lightning Marden bit his back and jumped back into Zhongling's hands. A middle-aged man next to Xixia rushed forward and stretched out his hand to help old man Gao up, only to find that his whole body was trembling, and the back of his hand was black. Zhongling whistled twice again, and the lightning Marden jumped out and rushed to the face of Ah Sheng, who was holding Duan Yu. Ah Sheng stretched out his hand to block, but the lightning Marden took advantage of the situation and bit the edge of his palm. Ah Sheng's martial arts were not as good as old man Gao's, and he could not resist it, so he immediately curled up and shouted loudly. Zhongling took Duan Yu's arm, turned around and left, whispering, "The disaster has already happened. Hurry up." Surrounding Xixia were the experts of the Shenem Gang. They had been collecting and using herbs all their lives, and had seen all kinds of poisonous things, but this lightning Marden came and went as fast as lightning, and was so poisonous, but no one knew its name. Xixia shouted, "Hurry up and catch this girl! Don't let her get away." 4 men jumped up in response and surrounded them from both sides. Zhongling whistled repeatedly, and the lightning Marden jumped from one man to another. In just a blink of an eye, it had bitten the 4 men one by one. Each man either rolled to the ground or huddled up. Although the Shenem Gang members saw that the little Marden was very scary, no one dared to retreat in front of the leader, and 7 or 8 more people chased after him. Zhongling shouted, "If you want to kill yourself, don't come over." The 7 or 8 people each held a weapon, some with a medicine hoe, some with a broad short knife, hoping to use their weapons to stop the attack of the lightning Marden. But the little Marden was faster than any hidden weapon in the world. It only needed to touch the back of the knife with its hind legs, and it bit the enemy in one bounce. In an instant, the 7 or 8 people fell down again. Xixia lifted up his robe, quickly took out a bottle of medicine from his arms, poured it into his palm, and hurriedly smeared it on his palm and lower arm. After 2 or 3 jumps, he had stopped in front of Zhongling and Duan Yu, and shouted in a deep voice, "Stop!" The lightning Marden bounced from Zhongling's palm and rushed to Xixian's nose. Xixian raised his palm, and his heart was secretly frightened. He didn't know whether his secret snake medicine could do anything to this unprecedented poisonous Marden. If it didn't work, his life and the Shenem Gang would be ruined. Just as the mink opened its mouth to bite his palm, it suddenly turned in the air, tapped his finger with its hind legs, and jumped back with the force. The mink had a lot of snake venom in its body. Xixian's secret snake medicine was very effective and good at fighting snake venom. The mink could not resist the strong smell of the medicine. Xixia was overjoyed and slapped out with his left palm. With the remaining force of the palm wind, Duan fell backwards with a puff. Zhongling was shocked and whistled repeatedly, urging the mink to attack the enemy. The mink rushed out again, but the snake medicine in Xixian's palm was its nemesis. It was about to bite his head, face, and thighs, but Xixian's palms flew and forced it to stay away. Xixian saw that the mink jumped like lightning, and he was also afraid, and he kept issuing orders. Dozens of gang members surrounded him from all directions, each holding a bundle of herbs in their hands, and lit a fire, with thick smoke billowing. Duan Yu had just climbed up from the ground when he suddenly felt dizzy and fell down. In a daze, he saw Zhongling's body shaking constantly, and then he fell down. Two gang members rushed up to grab Zhongling, but the lightning Marden protected its master and jumped over to bite each of them. Everyone retreated in horror and surrounded them, shouting and yelling, but they didn't know where to start. Xixian shouted, "Burn Realgar in the east, Musk in the south, and everyone in the west and north should disperse." The gang members obeyed the order and burned Musk and Realgar. Shenam gang had all kinds of medicines, and all the medicines were top grade. The Musk and Realgar were pure and strong. Once they were burned, they immediately emitted thick smoke with a pungent smell, which blew towards Zhongling along the southeast wind. Unexpectedly, the lightning Marden was not afraid of the medicine and was still agile and flexible. In an instant, it bit down 5 more gang members. Xixian frowned, and a plan came to his mind. He shouted, "Cover it with mud, and bury the girl and the poison Marden alive." The gang members had hoes for digging medicine, and they immediately dug up large pieces of mud on the hillside and threw them at Zhongling. Duan Yu thought that he was the cause of the disaster, and Zhongling was buried alive, so how could he survive alone? He jumped up, threw himself on Zhongling, hugged her and shouted, "We will die together." He felt mud and rocks falling like rain on his head. Xixian heard him say, "We will die together," and his heart moved. He saw more than 20 gang members rolling on the ground, among whom 7 or 8 were important figures in the gang, including his 2 junior brothers. If he killed the girl, he would feel relieved, but the Marden was very poisonous. If he didn't get her unique antidote, he would be unable to save everyone. So he said, "Leave 2 people alive. Don't cover their heads and faces." In a moment, the earth and rocks had piled up to the necks of the 2. Zhongling felt extremely heavy, and Duan Yu hugged her. The 2 were buried in the earth, with only their heads and faces exposed, and they could no longer move. Xixian said sinisterly, "Girl, do you want to live or die?" Zhongling said, "Of course I want to live. If you kill me and brother Duan, many of you will not be able to survive." Xixian said, "Okay. Then you quickly get the antidote for the Marden poison, and I will spare your life." Zhongling shook her head and said, "Sparing my life is not enough. You must spare both of our lives." Xixian said, "Okay. Sparing both of your lives, that's fine. Where's the antidote?" Zhongling said, "I don't have the antidote. Only my father can cure the poison of the lightning Marden. I told you a long time ago, don't force me to do it, otherwise I will definitely provoke my father to scold me. What good will it do you?" Xixian said, "Okay. Sparing both of your lives, that's fine. Where's the antidote?" Zhongling said, "I don't have the antidote. Only my father can cure the poison of the lightning Marden. I told you a long time ago, don't force me to do it, otherwise I will definitely provoke my father to scold me. What good will it do you?" Xixian said sternly. "Little kid is still talking nonsense at this time. The old man is furious and will let you starve to death here." Zhongling said, I told you the truth, but you don't believe it. Alas, in short, this matter is extremely bad. I am afraid that I can't hide it from my father. What should I do? Xixia said. What is your father's name? Zhongling said. You are quite old. Why are you so unreasonable? How can I tell you my father's name casually? Xixia has been in the martial arts world for decades and is quite famous in the martial arts world. Today, he met Zhongling and Duan Yu, two funny people, and he was really helpless. He gritted his teeth and said, "Bring a torch. Let me burn the girl's hair first, and see if she will tell it." A gang member handed over the torch, and Xixia took it in his hand and took 2 steps forward. Zhongling saw his ferocious eyes under the light of the fire, and was frightened. She shouted, "Hey, hey, don't burn my hair. It will hurt so much if my hair is burned off. If you don't believe me, burn your own beard first and see." Xixia laughed grimly. "Of course I know it hurts. Why do you have to burn my beard to know?" He raised the torch and shook it in front of Zhongling's face. Zhongling screamed in fear. Duan Yu hugged her tightly and shouted, "Goat beard, I caused this. You come and burn my hair." Xixia said, "Since you are afraid of pain, then quickly get the antidote and save my brothers." Zhongling said, "You are really stupid. I told you long ago that only my father can cure the poison of the lightning marten, not even my mother. The lightning marten is rare in the world. It is a natural divine creature, and the poison on its teeth is extremely strange. Do you think it is easy to cure?" Xixia heard the people around who were bitten by the lightning marten groaning in strange voices. He thought that the marten poison was really unbearable. Otherwise, these people were heroes who valued their reputation very much, and they could not groan even if they had their hands and feet cut off. They had already been given medicine to treat snake venom by others, but hearing the groaning sound, it was obvious that the snake medicine that the gang had always known for its efficacy was not effective. Some people even took out various medicines to treat scorpion venom, centipede venom, and poisonous spider venom, and tried them on the gang members who had been bitten by the lightning marten. Those people only screamed more miserably. Xixia glared at Zhongling and shouted, "Who is your father? Say his name." Zhongling said, "Do you really want me to tell you? Aren't you afraid?" Xixia was furious and raised the torch to burn Zhongling's hair. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck. He had been bitten by something. Xixia was horrified and hurriedly took a breath to protect his heart. He threw away the torch and reached behind his neck to grab it. Suddenly, he felt another pain on the back of his hand. It turned out that after the lightning marten was buried in the soil, it quietly drilled out and took advantage of Xixian's unpreparedness to launch a surprise attack. Xixia was bitten twice in succession, and was so frightened that he immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and used his internal energy to drive out the poison. The gang members hurriedly shoveled sand and covered the lightning marten. The lightning marten jumped up and bit 2 people. A white shadow flashed in the dark and fled into the bushes and disappeared. Xixian's subordinates hurriedly took the snake medicine, applied it externally and internally, served the gang leader, and stuffed a wild ginseng into his mouth. Xixia used his internal energy to resist the 2 marten poisons at the same time. In less than a cup of tea, he could no longer hold on. He gritted his teeth, pulled out a short knife from his waist with his left hand, and chopped off his right arm with a swipe. As the saying goes, a poisonous snake stings the wrist, and a strong man cuts off his arm. But if the back of the neck is poisoned by the snake, it is impossible to cut off the head as well. The gang members were trembling in their hearts, and hurriedly poured gold wound medicine to apply to him, but the broken arm was bleeding like a spring, and the gold wound medicine was washed away by the blood as soon as it was applied. Someone tore off his clothes and stabbed him hard in the crook of his arm, and the blood gradually stopped. Zhongling was so frightened by this tragic scene that her face turned pale and she dared not make another sound. Xixia asked in a deep voice, "How many days can you live after being bitten by this ghost Mard?" And Zhongling said in a trembling voice, "My father said that you can live for 7 days. But your Xixia gang leader has deep internal strength and great martial arts. I'm afraid you can definitely live a few more days." Xixia snorted and said, "Pull this kid out." The gang members agreed and pulled Duanyu out of the earth and rocks. Zhongling shouted anxiously, Hey, this is none of his business. Don't hurt him." She struggled with her hands and feet, trying to take the opportunity to climb out. The gang members hurriedly filled the cave where Duanyu had lived before with mud. Zhongling was unable to move and couldn't help crying. Duanyu was also very scared, but he forced himself to stay calm and smiled. "Miss Zhong, a real man should not be afraid of death. You should not show weakness in front of this evil man." Zhongling cried, "I am not a real man. I don't want to be afraid of death. I have to show weakness." Xixia said in a deep voice, "Give this kid the broken heart powder. Use a 7-day supply." A gang member poured half a bottle of red medicine powder from the medicine bottle and forced Duanyu to swallow it. Zhongling shouted, "This is poison. You can't eat it." Duanyu knew it was a powerful poison when he heard the name broken heart powder. But how could he refuse to take the medicine if he fell into the hands of others? He swallowed it immediately, tasted it, and smiled. "It tastes sweet. Xixia gang leader, do you also eat half a bottle?" Xixia snorted angrily. Zhongling burst into laughter and then cried again. Xixia said, "This broken heart powder will take effect after 7 days. And the intestines will be torn apart and the person will die. Go get the antidote for the Marden poison. If you can come back within 7 days, I will detoxify you and then release the little girl." Zhongling said, "The antidote alone is not enough. My father must use his unique internal skills to detoxify the lightning Marden poison." Xixia said, "Then ask him to ask your father to come here to save you." Zhongling said, "It's easy for you to say that, but how can my father come out of the mountain? He will never leave the valley." Xixia pondered and said nothing. Duanyu said, "How about this? Let's all go to Miss Zhong's house and ask you to treat and detoxify. Wouldn't it be faster?" Zhongling said, No, my father has said that no matter who it is, as long as they step into my valley, they must die." Xixia thought, "I can't leave here until the matter of Wuliang's sword is over. If I miss the matter here, how can Tianshan Tonglao forgive me? I will only die more miserably." The itching and numbness of the Marden bite on the back of his neck became more and more severe, and he couldn't help but groan a few times. Zhongling said, "Master Xixia, I'm sorry." Xixia shouted angrily, "I'm sorry." Duanyu said, "Master Xixia, you spoke foul words to Miss Zhong, which is ungentlemanly." Xixia shouted angrily, "Gentleman, you are a bitch." He thought, "I have a life and death spell planted on my body. It will be very painful when it attacks. It's better to die now and get rid of everything." He said to Zhongling, "I can't care about all this. You don't have to ask your father. Let's die together." There was a sense of sadness and self-pity in his words. Zhongling thought for a moment and said, "Let me go. I will write a letter to my father, asking him to come and save you. Send someone who is not afraid of death." Xixia said, "I asked this kid named Duan to go." "Why did you send someone else?" Zhongling said, You are such a forgetful person. Whoever steps into my valley must die. I have said it before, right? I don't want Brother Duan to die. Do you know that Xixia said gloomily, if he can't die, should my men die if we don't go, we won't go. Let's all die. Let's see who dies first, you or me. Zhongling sobbed and cried again, shouting, you old men are so shameless. You just bully my little girl. Everyone in the world knows it now. Everyone is saying that the reputation of the leader of the Shenan gang, Xixia, has been ruined. It is not the behavior of a hero. Xixia used his power to resist the poison and ignored her. Duan, you said, let me go. Miss Joan, your father saw that I was going to report the news and asked him to come and save you, so I think he would not harm me. Zhongling suddenly showed joy and said, I got it. I'll teach you a way. Don't tell my father that I'm here. If he kills you, he won't know where I am. But as soon as you bring him here, you must escape immediately, otherwise you will be in trouble. Duan Yu nodded and said, this method is feasible. Zhongling said to Xixia, Master Xixia, Brother Duan escaped as soon as he arrived. How can you give him the antidote for the broken heart powders? Xixia pointed to a large rock in the northwest corner in the distance and said, I will send someone to get the antidote and wait over there. After Duan Jun escapes to that rock, he will get the antidote. He wanted Duan Yu to ask someone to come and save her life, so he was more polite in his address. So he issued an order and ordered the gang members to dig Zhongling out. First handcuff her hands with iron handcuffs, and then dig up the soil from her lower body. Zhongling said, how can I write a letter if you don't let go of my hands? Xixia said, you are a cunning girl. If you write a letter, you will probably do something tricky. Just take a token with you and ask Duan Jun to see your father. Zhongling smiled and said, I hate writing the most. It's the best thing for you to tell me not to write a letter. What token do I have? Well, Brother Duan, take off my shoes. Your father and mother will recognize them when they see them. Duan Yu nodded, leaned over to take off her shoes, and held her ankle with his left hand. He felt that it was slender and not full. His heart was slightly moved. He raised his head and smiled at Zhongling. Under the firelight, Duan Yu saw a few tears hanging on her cheeks, but her eyes were full of smiles. He couldn't help but stare at her. Xixia was getting impatient and shouted, Go, go, you two little kids are just looking at me. Why should I look at you, Brother Duan? If you invite someone back quickly, I will let this girl be your wife. You want to touch her feet. There are many days ahead. Duan Yu and Zhongling both blushed. Duan Yu hurriedly took off a pair of flower shoes from Zhongling's feet, put them in his arms, and couldn't help looking at Zhongling again. Zhongling laughed. Xixia said, Brother Duan, go early and come back early. Our lives are at stake. If there is any delay on the road, everyone will lose their lives. Miss Joan, how many days will it take to go back and forth from here to the mansion? Zhongling said, if you walk faster, you can get there in 2 days, and at most 4 days, you can also come back. Xixia was relieved and urged, go quickly. Zhongling said, I will tell Brother Duan about the road. You all go away. No one is allowed to eavesdrop. Xixia waved his hand, and all the gang members walked away. Zhongling said, you go away too. Xixia gnashed his teeth secretly, thinking, after I recover from my injury, if I don't treat you like a little kid, Xixia, will be in vain. He stood up and walked away. Zhongling sighed and said, Brother Duan, we just met today and we have to separate. Duan Yu smiled and said, "It's nothing to go back and forth for 4 days." Zhongling stared at him for a long time with her big eyes and said, "You go to see my mother first and tell her the reason. Then let my mother tell my father, and things will be much easier." Then she stretched out her toes and marked the road on the ground. It turned out that Zhongling lived in a valley on the west bank of the Lankang River. The journey was not far, but the terrain was very secretive. There was a secret code at the entrance. If it was not pointed out, it would be difficult for outsiders to enter the valley. Duan Yu had a very good memory. The road that Zhongling said turned east and west, and curved south and north. He remembered it after listening to it. After Zhongling finished speaking, he said, "Okay, I'll go." He turned and left. Zhongling waited for him to walk more than 10 steps, and suddenly remembered something and said, "Hey, you come back." Duan Yu said, "What?" and turned back again. Zhongling said, "Don't mention your last name Duan, and don't mention that your father can use the one finger's N. Because my father might have other thoughts." Duan Yu smiled and said, "Yes." Thinking that this girl is young but has a lot of ideas, he hummed a tune and left.